It's 420. Everybody take a hit and say hey.
Howdy, howdy.
Howdy, howdy, folks.
Ah, nice. How you guys doing?
Hey, everybody. Doing good.
Hey, there's Zach Chase. I haven't seen that face for a hot minute. Hey, Zach.
How are
welcome.
you? Good to see you all.
Glad you joined us.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
We got both our Zachs. We got Tiffany.
Mm-hmm.
We got Valerie.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Oh, here comes
I'm
Alicia.
here.
Hey, everybody.
Driving,
Welcome.
sorry.
Oh, glad you're here with us, though. Thanks. Oh, my gosh. Another week. Almost
Another
done, Drew.
week. Almost
Another
done.
week. Almost done.
How much longer for the session? When is that done?
It ends, is it March 12th? I have to double check the calendar. Mid-March. Yep. 45 days of hell.
At least halfway through.
We are. You know, as much as we grumble and gripe about our legislators and our elected officials, it is a tough job. It's one you fight like hell to get into office, and once you get there, it's not always appreciated. So my heart bleeds for them, but I'm also going to rip them up a little bit today because we've got some problems with some of our legislation that's being proposed. We also have some good stuff. Go ahead.
You're a lot nicer to them than I am, so
I know.
We'll just go
I'm
with
going to
that.
play the good cop sometimes, okay? You play the bad cop. It's tough, you know. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, like if you've followed any of our Zoom sessions, my biggest beef with the legislature is that so many times they're acting in bad faith, and I don't know why that triggers me so hard. It could, maybe it comes from a military background, you know, in the Air Force, you know, we have our core values: integrity first, service before self, integrity in all we do. You know, these are like values that I was ingrained literally at push-ups as I was doing push-ups, learning those core values. And then, you know, come to see people that have also taken, because, you know, there's only a few people that take the same oath that or similar oath that I did in the military. And you know, it's the military. We have elected officials, and you know, our police, and people swear an oath to protect and defend our Constitution and whatnot. And so I guess when I see people acting in bad faith, that's just always such a trigger for me. It's like, can't you just like be a decent person for once and just speak at face value and not in riddles and double speak, and you know, saying one thing knowing that you've done something on the exact opposite and agreement in the back. Like, I'm just tired of the duplicity, I guess. Yeah I'll step off this soapbox. Christine, you?
Yeah, it's hard dealing with legislators because you do get talked. Oh, and we have Doug Rice joining us, so I bet he can give us some feedback. He's done a lot of lobbying for firefighters. I know, Doug, every time, honey, I love you so much, but I'm going to drag you in. Doug's done lobbying for various topics too, and so you get you always get two faces to your legislators. You get the person who is like, I'm compassionate to what you're going through, or I believe in what you're pushing, but I can't. I have to do something else. I have to vote this way because I'm in a conservative district and I'll lose my seat if I don't. And so it's so hard.
Or more like the Utah way, I have to this way, otherwise the leadership is going to punish me and take me off my committee assignment if I don't, you know, follow along with the laid out narrative of what they all agreed to before the session even started. And so I guess not recognized as a reality which they operate is kind of just wanting to be ignorant to the process and hoping it might be decent.
Yes. Well, there is some truth to what you're saying there. Legislators are betting on that people aren't paying attention. And so they get very crafty with their words. They get very crafty with how they frame things to the public as opposed to what is actually happening in the legislation. The devil's in the details, what they always say, and that is a fact. You've got to read those lines and make sure you understand what the whole piece is doing and not just what a lobbyist is telling you it's supposed to be doing. So yeah, the letter of the law, the intent of the law, it's all very subjective at times, it feels like. And they write legislation in a way that there are just gaping holes for people to just walk right through. And so it's so cumbersome. But that sort of leads us to today's topic with this new legislation that's come out. I want to kind of walk people through the process of what legislative process is like, and then talk about the new bill that's here. And then I know, Drew, you wanted to, and then have Valerie join us for that conversation because of her skill set and background. But then you and I, you're going to dive into the other cannabis bills that are there, just kind of go through it to make sure people understand what's happening. David Jolly over at the Utah Bee, which is an online publication, is posted a little synopsis on the legislation that's up there. So we'll run through that too. So welcome, folks. We're going to talk about cannabis and mushrooms today, because that's what's on the Hill for legislation. Kind of crazy. I never thought.
And I was going to say, I was muted, but yeah, a great synopsis by David Jolly with the Utah Bee. So we're going to be covering that. And thank you, David, for attending the meeting and covering this for those of us that weren't able to be there. This is a huge resource. So thank you for doing things like this.
Absolutely. That's very
cool. And also
cool.
seeing that the county intentionally schedules these meetings at 9 o'clock in the morning. That's not convenient for, any normal person that has a job or work or any other.
It's not. But I want to give a shout out. There's a lot of those who are attending our 420 session right now do attend those meetings. These patients who are advocating, because a lot of the reasons why they follow TRUCE is they want to learn the process. They want to understand how they can be more effective at creating change and not just letting other people carry their water for them. And so that's what TRUCE is about, is teaching that advocacy side. So they are attending those meetings and have been attending those meetings for, gosh, guys, over a year and a half now, it feels like. They started to get concerned when we were talking about synthetics and Delta-8. And I tried to figure out why on earth our state having a banned product had actually opened up the floodgates for this to happen. And, you got to go back and backtrack to find out where all these things happen. And as I was sharing with patients where these things happen, they were like, well, what's rulemaking? Where do you go for that? When does that meeting happen? What are you talking about? What calendar? I realized our audience, after the ballot initiative had passed, there became a real deficit in education as to what is going on and what happens next in the process. During our lobbying years with Doug and me, we saw the implementation of a lot of these boards precursor to the ballot initiative ever coming to fruition. So they were trying to set up, their anticipation of what was happening. And now that's a lot of what we're contending with. So the health department has their monthly meeting, and the health department has it used to be called the Cannabis, the Cannabinoid Product Research Board. And their duties were to set up dosing guidelines. Their duties were to review. Duty, I did say. And also to set up research on products that were supposed to go onto the shelf. And that is actually where I kind of traced back where we started to listen in on the committee hearings. And that's when we discovered that the health department, we'll call them the right hand, the health department didn't realize that the ag department, we'll call them the left hand, was doing something they shouldn't. So quite literally, the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. The left hand, in their rulemaking, opened up CBD, THC, sorry, I lost the words, guys. They have THC analogs.
And for those that don't know, the body is the executive branch.
Yes, just in case those were wondering. So
I think we're on a little bit of a delay.
Oh, are we? Sorry about that. So anyway, we've got the two departments allowing one thing and the other one who is supposed to be approving the products had no idea that these synthetics were being allowed into the medical market. And so that's where the patients who are attending today and several others started to be effective. Attending those meetings, they were allowed to start speaking up. At first, when we attended, those mics were hot and those chats were open and we were lit. And we had a lot of dialogue going back and forth during those meetings. And it did take the state to figure out that they had to lock some of that down, and some protocol came into place about how we were going to engage during these board meetings. Anyway, patients started speaking up about the quality of products that they were paying outrageous prices for. And it did create some
And they
effective
realized that
change.
that chat,
Yes.
that chat room that we're blowing up was a public record. And so they had to put that in. So you know how fast that little ability went away.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yep.
they didn't want the public to have that open access to enter into the public record.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword on that one. I get trying to get through a meeting in an hour and you can't do it when you now have 30, 40 patients watching you and they all want to say their 2 cents. But we also need to make sure that they serve us, the public, and we need that ability and that right to still engage. And so I that's why I encourage patients and public to attend when they can. If you can't do it every month, at least go back and watch the videos. They are put up on YouTube, so you can go back and watch them and then email the departments and get it on public record, the concerns that you have. Excuse me. So those meetings are helpful. They're at least for patients to understand what's going on, why the laws happen. So you have a department that is actually, implementing the laws that go on, but they have the ability to make minor changes in rulemaking. And they get that through going to these boards, getting feedback from different other departments. And that's how we kind of get to where we are today. I want to get to the psilocybin stuff because I don't know how long I've got Valerie, and I would like to pull her into this conversation. So a law went out last year about a task force for the psilocybin. And this task force during the summer, this past summer in 2022, started looking at psilocybin as a potential aid for mental health therapy. Valerie, our vice chair, has been following that issue and listening in, having some conversations with individuals who were on that task force. In her background, she used to work for MAPS, and so she was very interested in how Utah was going to move forward on this topic. And now here we are this session. What is the fruit of their labors is this piece of legislation. And it's a little concerning the way it's drafted, because it's very reminiscent of our own current medical cannabis bill. And as a lot of natural medicine users know, cannabis and psilocybin are not the same things. You can't substitute one for the other, and nor can you go into Utah code and just replace one name for another and think you've developed an ethical program that's catering to the public and patients. So I wanted to bring Val in. Me and Drew and Val have been reviewing this bill, and I just wanted to introduce her and kind of get her insights on what she thinks of this legislation, where we are in research, and where we hope to go. Are you there, Val?
Yeah, I am. I'm in the middle of switching on to my computer. I was driving and just got home.
Okay, I can
so give me a second if you want to let me in.
Okay,
then I will hang up.
Okay, for those who don't know what bill we're talking about, it is SB 200, and the sponsor is Luz Escamilla, Senator Escamilla.
Can I ask something real quick?
Of course.
Didn't Cox say something about it today? Like he's not.
We will get to that. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then
Thank you.
TRUCE actually put out a
Breaking
statement.
news.
So
Breaking
news.
Thank you, Drew. Yay.
Okay. So yes, everybody has an opinion about this, as you can imagine, and honestly, it's going to be for different reasons. We agree with the fact that we don't like this bill. That's about as much as we agree with Spencer Cox. We don't feel like it's fully baked. But I'm going to let Val kind of jump in. Please, just for people as they get to know you and remember you, give your background so they understand why you speak with such eloquence and authority on this topic.
Okay. I'm like, you always make me bashful. It's always awkward for me, but yeah, so I worked in oncology research for quite a long time in rare diseases, particularly blood cancers, doing clinical trials and running clinical trials. From there, I then moved into immunology and virology, and then moved into psychedelic research, working for MAPS. I was lucky enough to be their clinical operations program manager, which allowed for me to build basically everything that is not their phase 3 study. That includes all investigator-sponsored trials. So those are with clinicians and physicians and therapists who are trying to do community local practice work or research. And then I did vet services and trials in that regard. We were working on anorexia, lymphoma, bulimia, anorexia nervosa and bulimia, as well as ibogaine trials, and looking also at some psilocybin studies and working with providers there as well. So my background really comes from kind of the triad that creates what we know as our medicine. As a clinical specialist, what we would do is basically work to help our doctors turn their language into digestible and consent for patients. So we would help them make sure that patients understood what the study was for, what it would do to them, how these medicines would work. But then we also had to work with the doctors to translate that science into government speak and teach doctors how to meet the government obligations of how our government manages our healthcare through FDA requirements. So for me, I really come from that in-between space of creating a network and a feedback loop that then turns into what we see as medicine. So a lot of my background at MAPS was spent looking at how we begin to do what is called an expanded access trial.
Can you remind people what MAPS is? Because
yeah, so MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Okay.
They started about 36 years ago. By Rick Doblin. He was an oncologist who decided to push the bounds and study not only cannabis, but MDMA in couples therapy, and saw a lot of progression there, and had to go and challenge the DEA and the FDA to be able to do the research we do now. So they have been a huge proponent of piloting research. But one thing that they did was make sure their company was a public benefits corporation, so that the data that they get from these types of trials stays open source to allow for more research, but also to leave it as an open access opportunity to actually address our mental health.
That's cool. So you are, I guess, kind of knowledgeable on some stuff.
I mean,
just a little bit of stuff.
I think everybody's always learning. And so even for me, I would say that this is the thing about psychedelic therapy, is that it's not new.
Right.
It's really that we had researchers, we had scientists who then began to leave our third world spaces, and they started going to indigenous places, and they were seeing these transformational experiences, and then they were also then researching them and bringing them back and writing the books that started to build what we first started seeing as our psychiatric treatment approach. Psychedelics were utilized in the 60s and 70s. That's how we know about the research we know now. They were very progressive and very useful. But one thing they also did, and I think this is where Drew kind of tends to have a background in and kind of talk about, they, as they were studying these things, our government, they found that it actually increases freedom and the thought of like free thought, right? A lot of they were using veterans to test this and doing LSD trials and doing cannabis trials with our veterans that actually,
And they all became Democrats.
and that became the war on drugs. And that's where we're at now, is working from systems that were built off of indigenous medicine that we know works, but we are trying to put it into the framework of Western medicine.
Yeah. So let me pull us, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And let me pull us to what's happening right now. Everybody is curious about what's going on here in Utah. So you, I don't know if you attended any of the committee hearings during the summer, during interim, watching what was going on with the task force or anything. I didn't. I was busy doing stuff with cannabis because that's still a bit of a mess that we're still trying to help clean up. But I know the task force brought in a lot of compelling stories of patients suffering with various mental conditions and depression issues. And a lot of the similar stories were just repeated over and over about how effective psilocybin and psychedelic therapy has been in their counseling and in their therapy. And so it looks like they have moved towards creating a model for dispensaries and a distribution system of some kind for psilocybin here in the state. I don't know if you had a chance to review the bill. I think you and I were looking at it bits and pieces here and there, but to get an idea of the flow of what is being proposed, I think we should just explain to the audience what's going on, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so this bill, so first of all, the task force had about a year to do what is called an annotated biography. So that is a deep dive into the research that has already been provided to public consumption, basically. And they worked with a task force of pharmacologists, of psychiatrists, of docs, and also had one harm reduction specialist that's a public health advocate. And that's who I had the opportunity to meet and kind of work with a little bit, who reached out to really talk with Max in particular about what is required training, what should that look like? How do we ensure that if doctors or therapists or facilitators want to provide this, what type of requirements and training should be implemented for the state? But in addition, that research provided what we now see as a quote unquote conditions list. There's not really conditions in this one. They do acknowledge anxiety, depression, PTSD, and end of life support. There has been some great research around utilizing psilocybin for doula support for birthing. And then they left it very open-ended, as in that they say any other research that psilocybin may support. But they also really, the good thing that they tried to do in this bill was put together a framework for physicians, clinicians, therapists to access these medicines earlier than the FDA may allow, and going through that process by allowing them to have training and be a provider. This is now can be added to their credentials, similar to what they did with QMP for cannabis. The issue that we're seeing, though, is that a lot of the language is really focused on creating a regulating system and is mostly focused on industry and how industry interacts and grows and facilitates and does lab management of product. But they basically took the framework from our cannabis bill and put that into this bill. Not considering that the profile for psilocybin is very different than cannabis, but also the way that it's grown, the benefits of, non-synthesized psilocin versus whole plant mushroom, the cost of creating synthetics and having a lab. They say that a processing facility will pay $100,000 for their licensing, and a lab analysis would be $50,000 that they're paying, and that's annually. So those are the types of costs that we now know from what we've seen with cannabis cultivation get put back on the patient, and it makes it a very tumultuous experience for patients.
Agreed. It's
With the
frustrating.
Outrageous.
system,
It really is.
that also limits patients' access, rather than allowing for a patient to work with a therapist. Within the mental health care system, it's your therapist is everything. You get to a point where that person knows a lot about you. And so to be able to work with that provider already that you're comfortable with, they've now kind of limited that ability.
They do.
Because a provider would have to know they have many patients that may be interested in that to actually be a part of that system. So
Agreed.
yeah, Drew.
So yeah, go ahead, Drew.
Well, I think on top of that, and I know you guys know the answer to the question I'm gonna ask, just because we've had this conversation before, but for the sake of the audience, do you know how much it costs to go see a therapist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, and also the wait time? Right now we're averaging to get a new patient to see a mental health therapist is 4 to 6 months. And that's civilian. If the VA, that's a whole different story. But I think the problem with this bill is it makes a lot of assumptions about the accessibility, the affordability, and just of mental health care. I think, and it's it's
an elitist program.
It's operating in a world where everyone can go see a therapist and everyone can afford it and everyone has insurance, and next week and he's going to get me and I'm going to that's just not reality, but that's how they're regulating this program. And from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they're also creating new legal restrictions for those that use psilocybin outside of the very limited scope by which they're allowing. Is that correct?
That is part of it, right? There's different policing options now that open up, as opposed to where we see in Oregon and places that are decriminalizing. That allows for you to have what is a regular amount. And that's based on DEA, language that allows for you to have a small amount that would make sense for sacrament or for microdosing, that doesn't show that you're eliciting cells or doing anything like that. But also we are limited in the spiritual use aspects within this bill as well. So it really, I think a lot of it is the cart before the horse. It's actually assuming that we also have a production line or a way that this medicine is being produced and is already easily accessible to docs to just be doing right now. So the language that's being used is actually modeled to encourage a lab produced medicine, as opposed to allowing for people to grow their own mushrooms, take their own accountability for the medicine they're bringing in to their provider, know where it comes from, know that it's safe, that they have taken care of it, and taken care of it in the spectrum of how these medicines were used. It was very important in Indigenous experiences that know where your medicine came from, and if it's even better if you use your own hands to grow it. And you sit with somebody who holds the right energy with you, who understands where you're at, who can treat you in the way that you need, and you go out and have your journey and begin your healing journey. I think that it's an unfortunate aspect of capitalism that we are still being brought into, and this is how the pharmaceutical model works. There needs to be some sort of profitability for the state to then begin to be involved, or for our government to be involved. One thing they did say in the session that was very bothersome is that they said, it's here, but we're trying to catch it before it's an issue. And I'm like, yeah, unfortunately, it's been here for as long as you've existed on this planet, you're very, very far behind where the issue is now, unfortunately. So I think that they have overcomplicated things with this bill. I think that they have degraded the entire experiencing of generations of people around the world who have already been utilizing this. And I think that they're degrading research by actually ignoring the safety profile of fungi. We know for a fact, based on study and research, that fungi is one of the safest drugs we could be utilizing in our mental health care system right now. And it's one of the most affordable as well. So really, they've almost like cherry picked the pieces of research that allow for a more capitalistic model to be put in place. But this is also what we saw with cannabis, and that's why we have the synthesized issue we have now. So it's really a layer.
You use the analogy they're putting. Oh, you use the analogy that before the cart before the horse, but really what they're doing is they're putting the cart before the horse before they've even invented the wheel. And I think that's the problem of where we're at is
maybe they didn't even need to have a cart. There was already a cart there. Do you know? That's almost what it feels like. Is like they're trying to add a horse to a cart that's already being pulled by a horse, and that's really what it is. So I think that's the hard part. You know, peyote, San Pedro, these are known, and particularly when we think of Western medicine, it's so beautiful that we have the Religious Freedom Act, you know, that protects Native American sacrament, because this is a huge part of what they believe connects us all back to nature and connects us all back to a healthy and holistic state. And so if we are truly trying to look at a beneficial model that allows for a huge change in our mental health system, which, mind you, Utah has an extremely terrible opioid crisis that has taken a lot of people from us. And we now also know that psilocybin and ibogaine are showing extremely wonderful outcomes for addiction recovery, and they're non-addictive. And when utilized in the right setting and environment, they can truly change someone's life with one dose. You know, so it's really that they have built infrastructure to something that really never required it. It's been in the world with no infrastructure, and people are utilizing it. If we wanted to make it easier and we wanted to bring framework for practitioners to be required to safely provide it without re-traumatizing people and to gain that knowledge, then that really is what they should have put into that bill, and only that. And allow for people to provide, you know, it's like CBT therapy to me. If you know, cognitive behavioral therapy, nobody is sitting with a therapist telling them how to produce the cards that come for the person to go through for, you know, their therapy, or EMDR, you know. So I do think that they have looked at it as an illicit substance that it just never was, unfortunately. And that's you know,
and that's the thing. And yeah, and that's the problem. You know, they're with other therapies, you know, the state of Utah doesn't also have a database with every time I've had a CBT therapy session with my therapist, but they will in this case.
Exactly.
And, you know, the libertarian in me, it's a very crazy one. A lot of red flags go off, which is crazy because this bill allegedly is written by Utah's chief libertarian, Connor Boyack. So I have a hard time understanding the libertarian mindset of this behemoth of a monstrosity of this bill. But
well, it's a very capitalism focused bill. So it's more so, it seems that they're really trying to build an industry opportunity for growing, cultivation, licensing,
Mhm.
and it's really not been built in a way that thinks about the desperate need, particularly after COVID, to allow for people to have access to better mental health opportunities.
Absolutely. And it's
So,
frustrating
question
because you
from
just look
Facebook
at,
is: are we better off without then?
Oh, I'm so sorry, you froze.
yeah.
I'm sorry. I
Say
think
that again.
we were over each other. So the Facebook from Facebook land, we got a question: are we better off without the bill then?
Yes, kill the bill. Kill the bill. The
For
bill is
now,
not a good bill. Doing half-baked measures makes us years and decades behind. You're creating a situation where we're going to be targeting people now. If anything, we need decriminalization. That is the safest path forward, and that's honestly what we should be advocating for. And if we're not ready for decrim, then we need to educate the community, work with law enforcement, work with our healthcare providers, work with our mental health care providers to get educated so the community is prepared. Because I think decriminalization is the least harmful thing that we can do. Anything else is creating barriers. Val, what do you think?
yeah, I mean, I think that this was the thing that we're now seeing with our cannabis bill.
Yes.
There was a point where everything that the constituents wanted and public and this group wanted was in there. And then in order to just at least have what we could have, we were put into the program we have now, which is not really that accessible. It's not really cost efficient. It doesn't really help our industry do what they could be doing with all the extra fine money, and that they're being fined for all these random regulations that are really a way for our state to make fun.
Money.
And that's an unfortunate part of government that, you know, like, we know that the fining and all of this stuff is to regulate, but if it's not actually serving the growth of the industry and it's not serving the patient access or need, then did you really build a government program that is useful? You didn't. That's the complete opposite of what you intended for it to do, but it's at least making you money, right?
Yeah.
And that's the funny part to me, is that it's not making as much money as it could for everybody. Right?
And
It's not giving as much benefit as it could for patients. And the money that their patients are putting into it is not coming back as a great return or yield for that.
Exactly. And to that point, let me add to that point. If people can look at it like this, over 500,000 people in Utah voted for medical cannabis. And it took us decades to get enough people comfortable with having experiences with that. I don't think we are in a position in this state where we have over 500,000 people who are comfortable with psilocybin. It's just a different scenario right now, and there's a lot more educating that needs to be going on. I think decriminalization, can you imagine what decriminalization would look like for that space? You would be seeing caregivers, counselors really start working with it themselves. We can put in barriers, safe barriers, but that is different than creating a capitalistic approach to a psilocybin dispensary, because that's what they're looking at. A psilocybin dispensary, but for only a select few people. And that just looks like another oligopoly to me, another state-run cartel.
Yeah.
And I think that is the more important aspect of the conversation, is because we saw the program go through what it went through. We saw our industry fighting and clawing to come up with products that fit within those regulations and that would still at least be something competitive. So by creating a market like that, you're really actually not fostering the health of patients or thinking about the health or safety of patients. We should be able to have our industry be in a place where it is lucrative, but also they can be innovative. Right now, they're spending so much money on just staying regulated that they can't actually be as innovative, which would be more helpful for patients, right?
Agreed. Agreed.
And so that is the unfortunate part that I see coming with psilocybin that I had hoped we would be able to avoid, because psilocybin has such a safe profile. It's just has such a safe profile that
Right.
when you are also trying to grow your own, you have to work in a community space to understand what you're growing, making sure that it's non-toxic, making sure that it's okay. But that creates the understanding of patients, of really patient autonomy and patient's ability to understand their own medicine and understand their own use of it.
Yeah.
A lot of what we see with opioids that happens with addiction is that people don't really know what that's going to do at first. And then you start taking it and you need more and more and more. People don't know that that's how it works. They don't know that it's addictive, right? So we saw that with opioids. That's what Purdue basically banked on, is that people don't care about where their medicine comes from. So we'll just say whatever. And so to me, that's what's
Well, we're
being
taught
used
not to
very
care,
much
if I could
more.
correct. Government got involved and said, we're going to take care of all the thinking for you. And we're going to put
Well, and I think it's
regulations in, and you don't
cultural,
have to
right?
worry about it.
Even with
Yeah.
our food, we don't know where
Mhm.
all of our food comes
Mm-mm.
from. And so over
Yeah.
time, we were looking for a quick fix. And that's a cultural experiencing where quick fixes are great. But they're not awesome for long term. And that's what we learned about sugar. That's what we've learned about
Mhm.
overprocessed carbohydrates. That's what we've learned about triglycerides. So there's a lot of research that we now have about our bodies and our body's ability to manage these natural plant medicines. It's very, very hard to have an overdose or to become addicted to the actual substance. But
Yeah.
there is a mechanism for addiction that's a mental health issue that
Mhm.
can actually be treated by these substances, right? So we're
Yeah.
policing the very thing that could fix the problem we're trying to police.
It's a,
And
yeah.
that is the issue. And unfortunately, we've seen this over and over and over. This is what's happening in communities of color. That's what's happening to women's bodies. That's what's happened to veteran services. So
Mhm.
it's really unfortunate, but basically this bill, if we just take it as it is, puts in the red tape that we'll eventually be fighting down the line in order to
Yeah.
get access.
Yeah.
So it's
So
best
for
to
those
set
following,
it aside. Yeah,
sorry.
set it aside until
Yeah.
either the FDA and the federal government decriminalizes, and then go ahead and put in your infrastructure, or allow for this to be a bill that is focused on the training aspects and the certification requirements for doctors to have legal protection by their state to provide a very needed service. And that's really all this bill should do, is just provide legal protection for clinicians and physicians who are licensed under government, like under federal regs, to utilize their state licensure option to treat their patients the way they'd like. It's the same
Yeah.
thing that hopefully we'll do
See,
with
it
abortion.
seems like that's just so direct and makes so much sense, but they seem like they got to create a whole thing to do not that.
Well,
I
you
mean,
can't make money from that.
exactly.
You don't make a lot of money
That's
from
what I
from
need people
the
to
few
understand.
doctors
This
who
is a
wanna
money
do it.
grab. This is a money grab. And right now, patients don't have that. If they had the money, they'd be getting their mental health fixes by going to counseling, like by going and getting those needs met. And it's just not there. Go ahead, Drew.
Well, it's not just a money grab, and Alex made this statement on Facebook. The Utah legislature is trying to get out in front of the wave, so they have the tools to control it. Soon with cannabis, they don't want to help. So it's not just a money thing, but it's also a control thing. They do see the potential, and they want to have every single possible avenue of recourse and control at their hands. Because again, they're still in a prohibition mindset. They think this stuff is so absolutely dangerous. It needs to have specialized handler coming from this and that and register. It mushroom.
Yeah.
Like Star Trek flies one of their shit on it. Like it's mycelium. It's the most common, abundant living thing on our planet. We don't need to treat it like it's plutonium. It's not
This
that dangerous, but that's how they're operating. And
Agreed. Agreed. And this is
Next.
why I go back to saying we need education. Then there needs to be more educating. I think it's great. There was a task force that was brought together to think tank some of this out. That's fantastic. That's a conversation that we want to have happen. I think more of that needs to happen in the public. I think public educating needs to happen so they understand why decriminalization is truly the only logical path forward. It just doesn't make sense to start creating more and more barriers to these things. We're trying to step away from pharmaceutical models when it comes to natural medicines. And it just doesn't make sense to perpetuate this path that we've made mistakes with cannabis, guys. I mean, there's mistakes going on over here. Why on earth are we going to repeat that? I mean, I've been doing this for over a decade now with some of the same individuals who are running this legislation, and you would think that they would learn. There's not a desire to learn, though. What they saw was, oh, we can rubber stamp this, so let's rubber stamp it. Let's put another female out there with a bunch of patients behind. We're just going to replicate this all over again and call it psilocybin, and boom, bada bing, we're making money all over again. That's what's going on here.
and we have a whole nother department in the
Right.
Utah state government. So we have the Department of Alcohol. We have now the
Yeah.
Department of Cannabis. Now we're going
And
to have the
there's gonna be
Department of
something
Mushrooms.
for-
Like,
Yeah.
and again, I just have to laugh that this is all being orchestrated. Utah's chief libertarian. This is hardly libertarian or conservative. I can't understand why the state of Utah just really loves going down the line of becoming cartels. Like the cartels in Mexico don't even have the lock on alcohol, cannabis, and mushrooms. Like they have to at least pick one. Like the state of Utah, it's like they're trying to be like Thanos. They're gonna like have a glove controlling like
Like
all things. Like it's absurd. The paradox between conservative and libertarian thinking and these programs existing in the same mind, it does not compute. Can someone help
Yeah.
me make sense of that?
Well, and the sad
to
thing,
me, it's-
go ahead, Val.
Yeah, to me, it's reminiscent of what we've always had on a federal level. There's a lack of belief that people will autonomously manage themselves in that's culturally ingrained in our systems. And I mean, even just like elementary school, we all have to go do this thing that actually came from kids no longer being allowed to work in factories. So now what do we
Right.
do with all of the kids not working in factories? Well, let's go train them how to work in factories all day long. Right. So like that's the mindset of is that every human body needs to be governed by some other body. Right. And that to me is the scariest part, Drew, is that we're getting into a place in our world where we have all experienced a mass trauma. It's everybody has. There's no one person who didn't live through the last 2 years that did not experience some sort of impactful change in the way they perceive the world around them. Some people may have held on to that in a deeper way. Some people may not have. But then what came from that is that we have a better understanding that there needs to be some sort of mass mental health overhaul for our globe. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to continue going. Like we have enterprises falling and trade halting down. People are dying everywhere. It's just let's look at reality. And so we're in a place where research for particularly in plant medicines has had a huge spike because there's a huge need. And mental health really does start the rest of what we see our bodies issues doing. Honestly, we've now connected our gut biome to our mental health. the way that we experience our blood flow, our nervous system. You know, there's just so much impact. If we could change mental health, that changes whether you're exercising, that allows for you to make more relevant choices of what you want to eat rather than be feeling stuck and just wanting to, you know, eat whatever, you know. So it really is like, this is a holistic option that our government has the opportunity to allow. And what we're finding is they don't want the system to break, because if we get that freedom to start choosing not to consume everything around us, choosing not to just say, yeah, I guess that government works, whatever, you know, because most people don't have the room to live the life they're living and care about these systems. They're just too much. So I really do think that it's very layered, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, in that it's already been built, and why wouldn't they want that to continue paying them to build it?
Yeah. So I think people should definitely push back on this. I think Doug has a question, Drew, if you want to grab that. I think people should push back on this legislation and just say, we're not ready. It's not done. It's not that we don't want it. This just isn't it. Like, don't just settle.
Yeah.
Wait for good policy. That's why I put the question to our group a couple weeks ago. Is any psilocybin bill good, or do we want good policy? And my whole point being is, if you put bad policy in, you spend years and years and years and years and years and years trying to get it right. That's what we're doing with cannabis. We passed cannabis legislation 5 years ago. Our program still needs help. We'll go over that stuff a little later. So we need to start getting.
So the question was, how do we as patients get out in front of legislators, getting out in front of this? How do we take better control of the direction? And I think we talked about earlier was also the breaking news is Governor Spencer Cox has come out in opposition to this, and so have a few other people. So I think it's dead.
I think it's going to die. I don't think this legislation is going to pass, and rightly so. It's not ready for prime time. And all the passion in the world from people who got behind this legislation. I know there was a patient press conference yesterday. That passion is still there. We all still want you to have access to psilocybin. It just is, you can already do that, and we need to advocate for decrim and not a capitalistic money grab.
We need to do it the right way.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So yeah, if what you need to do is contact your legislators, and you can go on to the legislative website. That's le.utah.gov, and plug in your address, and then you can pull up who your legislators are. It will tell you who your senator is and who your House rep is, and just tell them in the subject line, put "I am your constituent," and put "no" on SB 200. And in there, just explain that you would rather see decriminalization happen before an industry try to be created. We are not there yet. This is still a Schedule I substance. We are just not there yet. So I'm sorry, somebody was going to say something. I was just going to
say, once our website's up, you can actually link to it from there as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, Doug, you don't have to go to Ken Ivory. But we do.
I know he
became
mine during the alignment too, and it makes me sick.
You do need to reach out to your legislators, though. We need people to do that engagement. They don't hear from constituents. So please, I promise you, when you're reaching out, it will make a difference. Be polite, be concise, and just let them know that this is not the right bill. This is not the right time. We need a little more educating going on in the community with that. So from this topic, I want to move us to the medical cannabis. We have 15 minutes or so left in the hour, and go through what David Jolly had written up. We had a meeting happen this week in the health department, and I'd like just a little synopsis of that. Drew, if you want to take that on.
Yeah, so I'll just go through. This is David Jolly. He did a review. He went to this thing. The biggest updates came from Lil King, Rich Shelbourne. He provided updates on the relevant bills being proposed to the legislative session. HB 72 is a medical cannabis governance revisions. This bill moves most oversight and regulation of medical cannabis pharmacies and couriers from the Department of Health and Human Services to the Department of Agriculture and Food. In addition, it would create a 9-member medical cannabis advisory board, which would facilitate pilot funding and coordination of cannabis products.
So that means that
I'll just read through before.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just explaining that just
No, you.
means that the pharmacies and stuff, all that's moving over to the ag department. So the health department is not going to be in charge of a good portion of our program. There'll just be that review board that's there. So that's what that just said.
I know I have some concern about that. There's
Absolutely.
different regulations and there's different rules by which a health department has to operate.
Agreed.
And a Department of Agriculture has to operate.
Agreed.
And it's more than just one of them wears Wranglers and boots while they work. There's HIPAA laws, there's medical requirements. We're dealing with patients.
There's community health
care
concerns.
There's a Community Health Act. Yeah.
Agreed. And so there is some concern I have for that. In that bill also for it talked about a cannabis commission, a 9-member cannabis commission. That's what that conversation was about. Last summer was the interim committee time that we were talking about that. TRUCE presented about what some of the problems were in the program. This board would help facilitate correcting that and babysitting the cannabis industry, as it were. So I'm not quite sure how they would work if the ag department is being given all the responsibility. I have a problem with how things are going a little bit. So we just need to pay attention, be vocal, and offer input to your legislators. And go ahead. You have others. Sorry.
Okay, so I'll continue. Yes. So HB 230.
Mm-hmm.
You're fine. HB 230, Center for Medical Cannabis Research. This bill creates the Center for Medical Cannabis Research within the Utah and requires the Department of Health and Human Services to work with the center to create guidance on medical cannabis use. Senate Bill 137, Medical Cannabis Amendments. This bill extends the expiration date for a patient's medical cannabis card from 6 months to 1 year, increases the cap on the number of patients a provider may have, allows DHHS to revoke a patient's card if the recommending provider withdraws the recommendation. An issue with that. Allows for a physician assistant to diagnose PTSD for the purpose of recommending medical cannabis, and allows for virtual visits for patients who are bedridden and or unable to use a computer. Allows for virtual visits for a patient. That doesn't make sense, because how would you do a telemedicine?
It might be a typo on his part,
but
because
we
it's
need to.
supposed to be.
Yeah.
It might be a typo on his part, because it is so that patients who can only use a computer. So it's those housebound patients who can't get into a doctor's office. It's promoting the telemed and getting rid of that first face-to-face requirement, which is fan-freaking-tastic. That's a really good bill. There's a lot of good things in that bill. Everyone should be happy about. Once a year renewals on our cards, guys. That's so nice.
And they expanded the patient availability for QMPs. So by changing it to 2% of the actual patient population that's in the system, that allows for patients or for docs to have up to about 1,200 patients under them, which is a really big deal, because it was very, very minimal.
So that was a nice trade. I see what they did there. So they
got rid
of the card renewals and opened it up. Go ahead. Sorry.
We're on a delay, so it's a little weird. So I'm trying to work that in. One of the issues that I have as reading this, and I'm gonna have to look into it, but we need to be specific. Are they only allowing what they call as bedridden, or is it more expanded language? Like, do they include agoraphobia, anxiety, or because I know we had to be very specific when we were dealing with Prop 2, because when they try to limit only bedridden, is that what they're going to do? So like,
I'll
the-
definitely check the
is
language. but I
telemedicine
don't-
not available if you're agoraphobia, but you could be up and around in your house? Like, how sticky are they going to be? So let's look into that. I'm going to
I
continue
thought
on.
I heard it
Oh,
said if
uh,
you were in a care center, like I thought that's what I read. Like if you were in like a care center.
I know that
that-
was
Okay.
listed. We'll have to go back in and see if there were examples. Zach Chase had a question or a comment.
Yeah. I was just thinking when you guys were speaking about this and the good news, I was like, why do we even have QMPs in the first place? And who needs to be the judge of and tell me that? I mean, I don't know. I just, the limits and everything, the year-long contract, it just seems so phony. I'm here in Nevada right now, and you just go because you need medicine, and they're all open at all different hours, and so you get your medicine whenever you need to. And there's just so many restrictions in Utah that I feel like I can't be a medical patient and exist in Utah. So all this doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't feel like celebratory news, because I'm like, what the fuck? Why is there a fee here in the first place? Why do I have to have this QMP approve of me, besides just that I'm an adult, and an adult knows when medicine is medicine?
I hear you, Zach. When Zach King
Yeah.
was up in Montana, he was having the same sort of frustrations, that he had such great access to quality medicine. He could be an adult, just go in and get what he needed. A lot of this has to do with cultural. Let's just be honest. We are where we live, and a lot of our former allies keep saying, we should be grateful for what we have. They come from a lack mindset and think, this is gracious that those who are of the predominant faith here have wrangled this down so tightly, and that our breadcrumbs should be handed with such, swollen bellies of feast. And it's just not that. It's just not what's going on. And you can hear it every time a patient calls us, contacts us, and is restricted to how much medicine they can actually purchase through our legal program. And I think that's why, going back to Valerie and the psilocybin section, we're concerned about creating this model again with psilocybin, especially because that mental health need is so great and so deep. And if there was truly compassion, we talk about a decrim situation. Anyway, I'm sorry, Drew, we're taking you off. Go ahead and finish.
I will not be subjected to these criminal abuses.
Exactly.
Okay, SB 91 is medical cannabis regulation amendments. This bill modifies certain labeling requirements for certain products, such as replacing the term artificial with synthetic cannabinoids. It also allows the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food to ban ingredients found in cannabis products upon the recommendation of a public health authority. Okay. In addition to requiring testing for heavy metals in vaporizer cartridges.
Oh, that's awesome. So that point right before you said, last year, you guys remember we were pushing back on the Delta 6A, 10A. We brought subject matter experts to the table, to the state, with letters saying this should not be allowed in your medical program. The insistence and pressure from certain industry players and their lobbyists and attorneys really kind of forced the hand, is how it was presented to me, because the health department didn't feel they had the authority to stop it from going out into the public. And so that line, I guess, is their way of saying the health department is going to have the authority to not allow these certain products. Just remember, in another bill that he just mentioned, all of the health department's authority is going to who? The ag department. So in this piece of legislation, it says this right hand has got the authority, but in actuality, in another bill, the left hand does. So how that meshes out in this, I have no idea, but that is a loophole that will be exploited when we come up to this synthetic conversation or degradants in our medicine again. So this is why it's so important for people to follow policy that's happening on the Hill. These loopholes get created, and this is when you go back to your legislator and you help them understand what's going on, because you need them to be proactive. It can't just be these two legislators who are sitting on that one bill making all the decisions that happen to that bill. Unless you bring your concern to your legislator, they can't offer an amendment. to correct that problematic language. They can't really even go to the legislator and say, hey, I have a constituent that brought my attention to this. Can you help me understand why it's that way? You're getting your legislator to be part of the dialogue. Why this is important? Checks and balances. Checks and balances. We get far too comfortable on the Hill about, oh, well, so-and-so is my friend and my buddy and I trust them. That's not why you elected your representative to be up there, is to allow their friend to do whatever they want. They represent you. And so you need to utilize your power as a voter to make sure you bring those points to your legislator. It just makes them be a better legislator. And if that legislator doesn't want to respond to you and doesn't want to act, please bring me that information. I want to know that. We want to hold these people accountable, because come election cycle, that information needs to be reminded to the people of those particular districts and counties and districts and wherever else. So this is why staying involved, following the policy is important. It's so much part of your education when it comes to cannabis that we can't do it without it. You have to follow what's going on with the policy in order to enjoy the cannabis we all love so much. So Bill, Drew, did we get through all the bills?
We did. There's also a hemp one that just redefines what is a cannabinoid. Certain products are not allowed in hemp. In addition, it prohibits some hemp products from purchased by those under 21. And then, of course, we've already talked about SB 200 at great detail, so we're good at that. Alex on Facebook says, be thankful for what we have is gaslighting. And that is so true. That it's a form of mental abuse, and we don't have to take it. So,
but we do need to be
proactive.
No,
coming up at the end.
Mm-hmm. Sorry for the delay.
Yeah, no, we're still on this delay, which is driving me crazy. But yeah, we're coming up on the end here. So if everyone wants to turn on their camera so we could have our Brady Bunch exit. But no, does anybody have any questions about anything we've been talking about so far?
Yeah, does any patients, anybody in the audience have questions or comments?
I do. I want to mention something. So is there like something like naloxone where, or if someone needs, or not naloxone, but let's say, if someone overdoses and you turn them in to the hospital and you don't get busted, is there a way to if protections around that with psychedelics? Like if I happen to have used a psychedelic allegedly at one point and it wasn't within a certain boundary that they set, is there a way to say, is that person going to go to jail because of that, or will it affect their job? And all of this, because it's a matter of life or death for me. Yeah, if I would, if someone doesn't find the help that they're looking for, and it doesn't happen to be in the boundaries of $300 for the therapist, and then 3 months out, and they needed their breakthrough through psychedelics yesterday before they leave this planet, then maybe there's something to be said of what's our emergency line, or how do we create some kind of grace or helpline for people that are going through it and still want access to these medicines.
Yeah, so I understand there's no provision for that. I'm trying to understand what you're saying, but yeah, you'll just be operating outside of the law. So, if you're not getting the psilocybin provided by the state of Utah, that is provided to the Department of Health, that is provided to your doctor who has prescribed it to use in his office, it's outside of the use, and
right.
If they want to, they can and will arrest you for illegal drug use.
Right.
And it's all dependent on,
Yeah, so Zach, what you're talking about is the framework that I would hope eventually we get to, particularly as one of the states with the highest opioid crisis issue. You're talking about a medical assisted treatment program. And this bill could have been structured in that way, and they just didn't do that. So what you're talking about would be MAT treatment. That's what we had hoped for, even with cannabis as an option, particularly for mothers who are pregnant and coming off of drugs. Cannabis is a wonderful option for them. And we don't allow that. We don't foster it. We don't offer any type of real true addiction recovery with supplemental options for care. And I love that you brought that up, because this bill could have been written to do exactly that. And they have the knowledge, because that's why Oregon did what they did. That's why we've seen the legislation we've seen coming out. Now Arizona is even trying to do that. So other states, New York already allows that and has a MAP program that has like highly decreased death rates amongst drug users on the street and in homeless populations. And it has also increased their homeless transition to successful life. So we've actually seen this demonstrated in many, many, many communities. Literally we know that that it works. We just don't do it.
Zach King.
Yeah, I was just wondering, could it be possible that we tried a decriminalization like ballot initiative, or would that kind of probably have the same effect as Prop 2, or would it at least show the voice of the people, or is it not quite there yet?
Tiffany and I's eye is twitching just by the word ballot initiative. No. Of course, I mean, we still have the access to the ballot initiative route, but I promise you, we don't want to do that again. Especially because the following 2 years after we passed the ballot initiative, they put so many high barriers on trying to do it. What we did was an amazing feat. We got 4 ballot initiatives passed that year. It scared the shit out of the legislators, and they tightened up those ropes and made those fences really high. So I don't think
it's going to be a whole nother generation before they allow us to do something like that again.
That's why community education is where it's going to be, and it's going to be building communities. I already know there's little mycelium networks all over this state. There are little pods, little churches who have been formed. They're everywhere. That's why I'm like, this is ludicrous that they are trying to propose this legislation. There are so many people out here who are already utilizing this, and you would be creating barriers for them to have that access. So yeah, let's not continue supporting this type of thing. Let's really educate the community on decrim. Tiffany, go ahead, lady, you got the floor.
So this is going back to something else that you guys were talking about as far as the bill goes. I have not finished it. I'm having a hard time finishing it. It actually causes me a little bit of anxiety. So
it's so triggering.
Think about this though. Anybody who's done mushrooms, okay? I haven't really microdosed. I didn't choose to go that route initially. I chose to go on a big journey, okay?
Yeah.
And I mean, you're talking 5 grams of mushrooms. My journey lasted 6 hours. So if my therapist is dosing me in the office, so now am I paying him for 6 hours for him to trip sit me? Seriously.
Yeah.
At $250 an hour?
Yeah, exactly. At $250 an hour. And that's only his regular weight, charge. That doesn't include the medicine that the state of Utah is going to be growing with all the different licensing fees involved. And we know that they push that extra cost onto patients. For crying out loud, like this is getting to the point where a patient would eventually go into bankruptcy for their own mental health, because after my ceremony,
$100 for a dose.
Exactly. And I did 2 days worth of those trips, and that I'm still going through therapy, so you can see how this is going to, this could be, I mean, you guys have said it already, but it's so blatantly obvious for those who have done this before how terribly expensive this is going to be.
It is.
For people who are out there just wishing and dreaming for this, they may not have a clue as to what they're in for. So anyhow, that got me thinking a second ago. I'm like, I haven't tripped for any less than 6 hours.
Yeah, I thought the same exact thing. I was like, what? How? It's like a half day to a day experience. How are they doing this?
And we're already seeing those costs for people who are just facilitating without that and underground, and it can be even more than that. Some people are paying $3,000 to $5,000 just to do these types of activities. And so really just the overall structure that is being built for this type of experience is already not a great one to whether we leave it underground or not. I think that I just wanted to add, you know, like we could go through the route of ballot initiative, but it's likely the federal government will approve this and decriminalize it before the state of Utah ever got to it. And then we are setting up regulations for them to regulate us because they'll have the freedom of states' rights. Yeah. So it's almost like, do we shoot ourselves in the foot or in the arm, you know? So I think if anything, the best thing we can do is leave the framework alone and let it become federally decriminalized and leave it. If people are already doing this, and let's everybody, the best thing you can do is go and register yourself as your own church and worship your own beautiful self, because you are all worth worshiping and it should be from you. So I'll leave you with that. Namaste, blessed. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Val. Thank you. I want to thank our TRUCE audience and all of our guests that were on Zoom today with us. We had a great, lively conversation. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up. We're going to try to move next week to 7 o'clock. We have a lot of people who are wanting to join us. And so we're going to move to 7 o'clock. We're going to have our 420 session at 7 o'clock so that we can capture more of our supporters and audience and people who just would love to be part of the conversation and have their opinions and thoughts heard, because that's what it's about, is building community and making sure everybody has a voice in this conversation. If you want to learn more about us, I hope our website's back up. We've had it down all day today for some reason, but you can go to our website, truceutah.org, and learn more about us. Follow us, donate if you like our programming, what we do here. We'd love a little bit of cash that would help us do what we do and continue staying on top of things. Thank you so much, Drew, for always helping me manage this. And Val, I absolutely adore working with you. You are just the best vice president ever. We really do appreciate you guys. You have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you next week, 7 o'clock at 420. That's confusing. You know what I mean? Love you guys. Chat soon.
Bye, guys.
We'll see you next week, everyone.
You should do 710 for oil.
Yeah, baby.
We'll see you guys soon. Come back soon,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
We'll see ya. Bye-bye.